Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Free Media, Free Minds, Cape Town TV's show where we look at the free flow of information in our society, its importance to democracy and some of the obstacles that get in the way. We're coming to you in the wake of the Marikana Massacre, a story that is going to really shape South Africa's history, and how the story gets told is of vital importance. Joining me in the studio, I have Mabhelandile Twani from the Progressive Youth Movement and Martin Jansen, Editor-in-Chief at Workers' World Media Productions. Welcome, guys.
Welcome. Hi.
We've all heard the story about how the police were acting in self-defense, how they were attacked by the miners, how they were fearful, etc., etc. We've all heard the government's description of this as a tragedy and call for calm. That's been the dominant media message. But there is a very different picture emerging of what happened at Marikana on that fateful day. So to start our discussion, let's take a look at this insert.
With 34 miners dead and 78 wounded, everyone wants to know what really happened at Marikana on the 16th of August. The mainstream media is dominated with television reports that the police were acting merely in self-defense. But the public is growing suspicious of these accounts, since these cameras were all embedded behind police lines and witnessed only a small number of the murders. There are now confirmed reports that most miners were shot in the back or while fleeing, or shot at close range as they hid behind rocks. Academics from the University of Johannesburg have demonstrated that this was in fact a well-planned massacre. Professor Peter Alexander explains.
And what you've seen is workers coming towards the army, and coming towards the television cameras, and they're coming through a small gap in the razor wire. Because the police left a small gap in the razor wire. There was a gap in the razor wire because that's where the police wanted mine workers to run once they had been attacked from the rear, to that stage, by rubber bullets and by tear gas. So some of the workers ran forward through the gap and they were easy prey for the soldiers to shoot them. Now that's what we've seen. But there's a question. How many people did you see dying at that point? I saw maybe 10, something like that.
Yes.
And how many mine workers did you see coming through the razor wire? Not much more than 10. So the question is, what happened to the other 3,000 mine workers? And where did the other 24, maybe more mine workers get killed? And what the mine workers told us, and we could find evidence for it in various ways, is that most of them dispersed in the other direction. And they headed for what is now being called killing copy, because that's where the largest number of mine workers were killed. What you'll find there is the evidence of where people were slain by the police. And much of that evidence is the evidence that the police have themselves left behind. And I want to show you something which I thought is really rather horrific, and I'll warn you about that in advance. But it's something left by one of the mine workers. And I'll ask mine workers if I can show this to you. And this is the remnants left by one mine worker. And you can see here, it's the rest of his trouser there. And there's the pocket, and this is the blood. This is the blood of the mine worker who was running away from the police when he was shot and fell to the ground and left his trouser leg behind him before his corpse was taken away by the police. That's the evidence of what was happening on Killing Copy. And I would suggest to you that this is not evidence of somebody who was about to attack the police and was killed because he was attacking the police. That's not what people do. They don't leave their trouser legs behind them. What this man was doing was running away from the police, who were firing from all sides, firing from the helicopter, and ran in to the only part of that area, if you know it, you'll know it's the case, the only part of that area where you can find some cover from the police. And as they ran into Killing Copy, the police attacked them again. Now, we haven't heard this story. We haven't heard it because the TV cameras weren't there. We haven't heard it because it doesn't fit the story that the government want us to hear. They want us to hear a story about people coming off the mountain with their guns, with their spears, about to attack and about to kill the police. But this is a different story. This is a story of mine workers running for fear of their lives and being slain down because they had no way of running any further. That's what this story is about. And I want to suggest to you that what this demonstrates is that this was a premeditated massacre of mine workers by the police.
The South African government is killing the citizens of our country. The police, the cops who killed the mine workers are the people who are appointed by the South African government to kill the citizens of our country. Comrade, if you can understand the mining industry, it's the backbone of our economy. But ask yourself, how much do they earn, these mine workers? Yes. Comrade, we've got a lot of instruments that we can use to disperse the striking workers. But the bullet, comrade, we've seen something that I was not expected to see in a democratic country like South Africa.
So a very different picture emerging there, a picture of premeditated murder that must have, you can only imagine, had the approval of some very senior government officials and politicians. You were actually in Gauteng last week and met with some of the miners. Which of these two stories do you think is closer to the truth? What actually happened?
In my view is that we met the miners together with their families, where they were sharing with us as to what happened, or really to the question of Marikana. In my view is that it's very cool to get a story from, direct to someone that was affected by the situation. So they told us very clear. It's been series of engagement with the management of the mine. And then that came as a result of that, because we're unsuccessful kind of negotiations, and they decided to go and take the action. But the action was more based on the strike, not on violence.
Yeah, did they intend to be violent or were they attacked?
No, they were not violent, but instead the police started the show by shooting them direct. And also there is something that is not appearing as well. The question of the helicopter shooting from the roof down.
You hear, and now we're seeing evidence that the majority of miners were actually shot in the back, meaning they were running away. Martin, how does the media get it so wrong?
Well, one is to go into, I suppose, how the media operates. And I think a person who wrote about this very recently, Jane Duncan, I think captured it very well. If you look at most of the TV footage, you'll see that it was taken from alongside or behind the police. And probably the journalist or the TV crew that did that would say that, it was safer for them to be there instead of on top of the hill or behind the hill or elsewhere, out of fear that they might have been attacked by the workers or the police itself. So I think the positioning of the media in that situation at Marikana was clearly behind the police. So you literally got one-sided footage. And I think what Jane describes is that it's very similar to what happened with the invasion of Iraq.
Embedded journalism.
Embedded journalism, yes, where journalists were taken around by the American soldiers, also arguing the reason for doing that was to protect themselves, because it was dangerous to be out there. But of course, in doing so, they got the perspectives from the American Army's point of view, and not from Iraqis or other people's point of view. So in this case, I think that's probably what happened as well.
And we see in the diagram, it really suggests that there's a premeditated intention to project one story towards the media, to let them see miners running at the media, when in fact those miners were running from bullets, tear gas, stun grenades. So I mean, the other thing that comes clear is that we very seldom are hearing miners' voices. I mean, you've met the miners. What are some of the things they would want to say if they did have access to the media?
Yeah, the other thing is that the media created a story that there was an infight between NUM and, NUM, yes, and AMCO. And then there are two things that they have been created by the media as well, which doesn't clarify as to workers decided to go alone and do the action alone. And they said they do not need any union that will lead the strike because of their disappointments on the leadership of both unions.
I mean, that's very clear for those of us that are following the alternative media, that the workers have rejected both unions currently and are in fact embarking on a very successful strike, continuing strike, a strike spreading to other mines. None of that in the media, Martin. In fact, instead we get sold this kind of elite story about competing unions.
Another thing, Mark, is that when we were there was a body, a dead body there. And then we had a meeting, we heard that there is a body. When we went out to the meeting and searched for a body, we couldn't see the body. But now the police, the other people saw the police taking the body in their vans and so on. So at some point there is a lie around about 44 people died. It's more than that because now there are other people that are being checked now, even now and then. And then I met one of the women's on the community that she told me that they are still looking and then
I mean,
they couldn't find
still
people,
many people missing. We're only learning now how many people have been arrested and in fact tortured in prison. Why, Martin, does the miner's voice and the miner's concerns and experience not come across? Why are we sold?
Well, I think it's clear to me that the media definitely has a class bias. And that stems from a number of sources and reasons. One, of course, is that most of the mainstream media is owned by big corporates themselves. So I wouldn't be surprised if companies like Lonim, depending on the shareholding arrangement, that the same owners would have shares in the big media companies as well. So,
and of course a vested interest in the idea that ordinary people can't make history.
Of course, that's what lies deeply at the source of it. But there is this class bias where ordinary workers, and in fact the way the workers were portrayed even before the massacre was, it was almost a colonial portrayal of them. They were these black savages with shamboks and pangas and so on, and they were just marching and being unreasonable. Not actually getting into the depth, almost positioning themselves on the side of the workers and looking at their conditions that lead them to be so angry and to make the demands on management.
In fact, you could argue that the media coverage before the massacre went a long way to create an enabling environment where the massacre could take place, portraying the workers as irrational savages with unrealistic demands. And we've since learned that the demand of 12,500 a month is not that unrealistic at all. In fact, it's a very realistic demand that the workers are still fighting for. Now, on that note, we're going to have to take a break. You're watching Free Media, Free Minds. We'd love to hear from you. The question we're asking today is, Marikana, did the media report the truth? And you can SMS us on 074 103 6704 or drop us an email, freemedia@capetowntv.org. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll be back just after this.
Is your life being torn apart by substance abuse? Are your family and friends expressing concern about your behavior? If you cannot face another day feeling lonely and depressed, give Akron House a call.
We are a dedicated team with a wealth of experience, committed to providing excellent treatment at an affordable price. Call us now on 021 790 7779.
Welcome back to Free Media, Free Minds. This evening, we're looking at the Marikana Massacre and asking, did the media report the truth? We've already learned that the vast majority of the workers that were murdered actually died away from the TV cameras. The TV cameras were intentionally positioned not to see what really happened. Martin, how your view of the television coverage?
Look, I think, as I said, most of the TV cameras were with or behind the police. There was one that wasn't quite in that position and gave us a very different picture, and that was Al Jazeera. And I'm hoping you can show that clip to the viewers. But the Al Jazeera one was slightly at an angle on the side, and the line that Al Jazeera had was that workers were literally boxed in by razor wire and armored vehicles, and of course tear gas, and herded into one spot or one area, confined, with one exit. And so when the police started shooting, workers obviously scrambled.
So the police said that this barbed wire was set up for their own protection, but actually they left a gap in the barbed wire
for workers to run through, yes. And
I mean, it's cold-blooded, pre-orchestrated murder. And that's not what we're being told in the media. We're being told that it's a tragedy. The ANC has put a lot of energy into trying to discourage any critical thinking.
Yeah, for me, this is not the first time, if we remember, that the ANC is doing this. I will draw my attention to what we are doing in Khayelitsha from the Progressive Youth Movement, where we had a similar situation, but they didn't kill the people, but instead they assaulted one of our comrades and then arrest the same comrade.
Let's come to Khayelitsha, but before we do that, let's take a look at another insert, because we need to also imagine what an alternative media would be. And what we're going to see now is an example of some activists with very little money have managed to put together a piece of media that begins to touch on some of the underlying and alternative stories. Take a look at this.
Feel this. To all those races, colors, and creeds, every man bleeds for the countless victims and all their families of the murdered, tortured, enslaved, raped, robbed, and persecuted. Never again. To the men, women, and children who died in their struggle to live, never to be forgotten. Proven Ben Menachem, yeah, my own blood, dragged through the mud, perished in my heart, still cherished and loved. Stripped of our pride, everything we lived for, families cried. There's nowhere to run to, nowhere to hide. Tossed to the side, access denied. 6 million died for what? Yo, a man shot dead in his back. Helpless women and children under constant attack for no reason till the next season, and we still bleeding. Yo, it's freezing, and men burning hell, some for squeezing. No hope for a remedy, nothing to believe. Moving targets who walk with the star in their sleeve, forever marked with a number tattooed to your body. Late night, eyes closed, clutched to my shoddy, having visions, flashes of death camps and prisons, no provisions, deceived by the devil's decisions, forced into a slave, death before dishonor for those men who were brave, shot and sent to their grave, can't awaken, it's too late, everything's been taken, I'm shaken, family, history, the making. Never again shall we march like sheep to the slaughter, never again shall we sit and take orders, stripped of our culture, robbed of our names, robbed of our freedom and thrown into the flames, forced from our families, taken from our homes, pulled from our God, then burned of our bones. Never again shall we march like sheep to the slaughter, never again leave our sons and daughters stripped of our culture, robbed of our names, robbed of our freedom and thrown into the flames, forced from our families, taken from our homes, pulled from our God and everything we own. The final solution is now retribution. Remedy, Wu-Tang.
Well, that insert definitely gives the issue a much broader historical frame. And of course, it also raises the question of, is how the media covered Marikana unique? Or how does the media cover service delivery and other protests around the country? And much closer to home, Mabhelandile, you with the progressive youth movement in Khayelitsha.
Yes.
Very briefly, give the viewers a sense of what your struggle is about and how you feel the media treats your struggle.
Yeah, there is more kind of underminism, but we understand that why they undermine, I mean, these protests that we are having, because we don't serve this class that they are serving, which is the capitalist class.
Yeah.
That is why they are not interested. And secondly, this media is biased on many reasons.
Yeah.
Because at some point you call them that we are having such, then you make a press statement, they are not responding.
Yeah.
You know, it's only few people who can respond, people that are connected to you.
Yeah.
I mean, as journalists, not just a media. It's worse and worse, the mainstream one.
In fact, Martin, I often feel if you want to know what's happening in the townships, you have to listen to the traffic report. Because that's where you hear about where the protests are.
In fact, I think you spot on, because what tends to happen is that unless there's violence or disruption of traffic, that kind of thing, like recently in Cape Town with the ANC Youth League, you know, the ANC Youth League threatening to make Cape Town ungovernable, and then there were a number of incidents close to rioting, led by the ANC Youth League and a number of supporters, where a bus driver was killed. And of course the dynamic between the ANC Youth League and the DA government in Cape Town. Now that received a lot of coverage. Yeah. But the other protest, ostensibly around the same issues, where they don't necessarily involve violence or rioting and so on, just get ignored completely. So the perception that's been developed because of that is that for ordinary people now, they seem to think that unless their protest is violent and it involves rioting and deaths and so on, only then will they get any attention and a platform to give expression to the public, to notice what's happening in the areas, and to take up the issues by the political leaders. And that's been a pattern for nearly 10 years now. And ironically, in a new South Africa that's supposed to support free expression, this is actually not happening for the majority of people, poor working class people.
I mean, the increasing protests in Khayelitsha, the Marikana Massacre, across the country, South Africa is on the boil. And I think many of us would argue it has its roots in our economic failure, that we haven't created the kind of opportunities and delivered the basic services that people fought against apartheid expecting. I mean, is that something you see, Mabhelandile, that the democracy is failing?
I do agree with you, but again, we need to look at which democracy are we talking about. Is it capitalist democracy or working class or socialism democracy, or what is it that we're talking about? Yeah. But in this case of South Africa, around the world, our democracy is a capitalist democracy.
Sure.
Others, they like to say bourgeois democracy, which will never serve anyone, but only serve few people which we know, capitalists, together with politicians.
Many people have believed and have fought for a democracy that it believed could at least deliver the basics of life to people. I mean, Martin, is the democracy failing, and are the emerging threats to press freedom and media freedom better understood in that context?
Well, this democracy, by and large, hasn't served the interest of ordinary, poor, working class people. And in fact, the statistics are quite stark, that over 70% of black people especially are living in poverty in this country, and yet this country is supposed to be the wealthiest in Africa and is supposed to be a middle income country internationally. So clearly, the problem of inequality having increased since the new democracy means that we have serious fundamental problems in this country. Now, what's happened recently, my own observation and analysis is that with the economic crisis from about 2008, the space for this government, the ANC government, to even give minor concessions to working class people is extremely difficult if the status quo is to continue and to remain. And so what's been happening, we've noticed over the past few years, and interestingly, especially since about 2008, is that the state has resorted to more and more repressive means of putting down opposition, of putting down any form of rebellion against the status quo, and directly or indirectly against its own rule. And I don't think, you know, the killing of Andries Tatani was an accident. I think it's part of the state's efforts to curb any form of opposition to it.
The murder at Marikana was sending a clear message to the labor movement to curtail their demands.
I think this attack on the working class is not a sober kind of attack, because most of these politicians, on the basis of ruling party, they have shares in these mines, and those are contributing factors of killings. Because at some point, when workers are resisting conditions, when workers are resisting, the way the wages is, they're going to be attacked. And then if you see now, presently, they are not interested in terms of addressing these demands.
Sure.
They will tell you about the commission of inquiry instead of, addressing what is.
One of the coercive means that the state will use, though, is to clamp down on the media, to try and keep these stories in the dark. I mean, Martin, why is it now the time to really defend media freedom? Why is media freedom important to the struggle for justice?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's essential. I think the biggest thing that this government fears is the black majority, the working class, to oppose it, right? Because that, ironically, is its support base, despite the fact that it doesn't represent its interest. So any